desert, dust in the wind, lay on the earth, rocks in my hand, sun in the east, shadows in the west, hear the sound of slithering in the sand, red rocks rise and red rocks stand, winding through these desert lands, red rocks rise and red rocks stand, winding through these desert lands. Rain is falling, greens the ground, seeds are swelling, singing loud, the stories told from long ago. Water is life, but the sun beats down, red rocks rise and red rocks stand, winding through these
Hey y'all,
desert
Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the
red
Ground
rocks
Shots
rise
podcast, a
and red
podcast
rocks
that
stand.
explores our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. You just heard a song by Mama Lingua called Red Rocks as the opening for this episode, a local Peonia, Colorado band. Before I get into some updates in this episode, I want to just go ahead and introduce who we're talking with today on the podcast. Jacquie Hill, family-loving community enthusiast. Jacquie is a plant person doing planty things on the western slope of Colorado, and after practicing her blend of story-rich folk herbalism for 10 plus years, she took her studies to academia, earning a bachelor's degree in botanical sciences from Bastyr University in 2019. While there, she made the most of the opportunities that she had at Bastyr and gleaned from teachers, mentors, taking every field class offered and immersing herself in the wonders of Western Washington. With a deep love of opposing forces, Jacquie keeps one foot in the science realm as well as the nonlinear. Jacquie spends her time exposing her children to the magic of the natural world with her husband Allon, contemplating the role of plants as myth keepers, and performing with her puppet troupe Singing Bone Medicine Show. It's been a couple months since I've put out a new podcast episode. I think that's the longest I have gone. I've actually had a couple episodes in queue during this time. It's just been insanely busy for me. I've been prioritizing what's right in front of me. I think in the last episode I was saying, I'm going to share with you guys more about some things coming up, and those things have passed for the most part. So, I did the sheepskin tanning class that I was going to announce here, but it's moved on and happened, and was a success. And I have done a handful of online classes, and they all were, for the most part, pretty interesting and successful. I don't have any other online classes planned at the moment, but I definitely have some ideas for winter series, based on my season of teaching in person and online. I know some of you subscribe to my Substack and also follow me on Instagram, and I do share updated things on there. I don't have anything publicly ready to announce in the realm of more teaching at the moment. I am going to be doing another apothecary sale. I did one in September. I'm going to do a smaller one at the end of November, early December. After doing a September sale and haven't done one in 2 years, I was really just so appreciative and honored that people came out of the woodworks to buy medicine from me and support my land tending and medicine making work and plant connection work. And I just really was blown away by the support in that realm. So if you're interested in buying anything from me, any of the offerings I'm going to put into my apothecary store, you can watch my apothecary at the end of November, and I'll be announcing it in other realms, so you can pay attention to when the store is going to be open. I don't plan on having the store open all the time. I'm still not in a place in my life to be able to keep up with that. So I like to do seasonal openings, and that's how I've mostly always done it. You guys have definitely been showing me that if I did do openings more regularly or have the store open more often, that it would be something that you would be into. So I'm open to you emailing me and giving me feedback on that as well. This episode that I'm putting out right now, I'm going to be putting it out really close in with the next episode. But I'm not sure, like, as of this moment of recording this, like, if I'm going to be releasing them both on the same day or maybe a couple days apart. But if you listen to this, you will know whether I have released both of them. But this conversation with Jacquie Hill, I actually recorded last February, and it's been on my list to put out. I want you guys in the world to listen to Jacquie's perspective and research on Ponderosa Pine, which is the primary focus of this conversation. But we also talk about like ethics in botanical research and a bit of Jacquie's personal backstory with her relationship with plants and going to Bastyr University and studying herbal medicine in this pretty serious way that you can do in the United States. We don't have a lot of options for like higher education with herbal medicine, but Bastyr University is one place that does offer that. Jacquie and I met when I first got to Paonia last year around this time, just after Day of the Dead, Halloween. I got here, and at some point I wandered over to the Paonia Apothecary and walked in to just look at what's going on. It's kind of a new business in town in a way, and she was in there and we just got to talking about plant stuff, and she realized she had read my blog before, and I feel like we were friends pretty quickly. We did some collaborations last year. We kind of organized a few classes at the apothecary. She taught some classes, I taught some classes. We also were hanging out almost every week last winter for a basket weaving club that took place on the land that I was living on this past season. And so we got to connect that way as well. And through all of that, I realized like, hey, like I really want to feature this person on my podcast, and they have a lot of different things to talk about, and this is just one of them. Much of what Jacquie focuses on in her work with plants is folklore and magic and ancestral lineages, specifically some of her own Nordic ancestral lineages with plants. We only mention that in this particular conversation. We mostly just talk about the research she did while at Bastyr on Ponderosa Pine medicine, but I'm hoping in the future I can get her to do another episode with me, because there's been a bunch of stuff that's happened in her life this year, and of course mine, around like the relationship between plants and grief, that I would love to have her on again to get into. And then we may also get into folklore stuff too. Hopefully I can catch her again sometime to share more extensively like what she is all about. But I wanted to get this episode out to honor the conversation we had. There are links in the show notes for this episode that relate to this conversation. We mention a couple books in this episode, and they are in my bookshop account, including David Merriman's Native American Ethnobotany book. And you can buy it for yourself, and we get a kickback, the podcast, if you do. But you can also buy the book for me, because I don't actually have a copy of that book. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that you can do with Bookshop. I have links for both in my show notes, where basically you can buy me a book, which I'm super grateful for. I spent a lot of my money on books. But you could also buy any of the books in my wish list, or in my registry rather, and yeah, we get a little bit of a kickback here on the podcast. I have links to a couple of the other things we talk about, including a link to a video about Henrietta Lacks, which we talk about in relationship to ethics and research, medical research. That might be interesting to look deeper into. She mentions it in the beginning of this episode. And yeah, a few more things are linked in there, as well as like many ways that you can support the podcast via Venmo or PayPal and Substack. Really appreciate any support that people offer right now for the podcast, and also, of course, the ongoing support people have been offering via Substack, and I have been publishing more of my writings on there, which has been always a big part of my work, even pre-podcast. groundshots.substack.com is how you get to it. On iTunes, you can see partial show notes. They only allow a certain word count, but you can see the full show notes on my website of sedgeandsalt.com under the header for the podcast. But I also link that in the show notes as well, that you can find on your platform that you listen through. Another way you can support the podcast and also get discounts on seeds that are regionally adapted to the Southwest and ultimately resilient beyond the Southwest. I have a discount code for Ground Shots podcast listeners. Ground Shots 10 is the discount code for buying seeds at vibrantearthseeds.com. The folks that run Vibrant Earth Seeds out of Cortez, Colorado are friends of mine, and they have been doing seed saving work for over a decade or more. And I've been to their farm and I really love what they're doing. And so we came up with a cool way that you guys can get discount on seeds, 10% off using that code. And also I get a little kickback for the podcast for you buying seeds to plant your garden with. So you can use this code anytime starting now to prepare for next season's planting. And the code is GroundShots10 when you check out. I'll have a link in the show notes to their website so you can see what they have available. Thank you so much for supporting small seed companies that are trying to keep these seeds alive and get them out into the world for people to grow and enjoy. So as I record this, I've been kind of stumped as someone who has somewhat of a public platform to know how to fully comment on the current situation in our world in the Middle East. It's something that's been haunting me at night in my dreams. It's brought up a lot for me, both in the realm of like, I am a white person who benefits from a lot of privilege where I grew up in the South where my family's been for 6 generations or so on both sides, for the most part, 5-6 generations, depending on how you want to count it. But in an area with so much dark, complex history of land abuse and also displacement of groups of people, and also like this pattern of marginalized people marginalizing other people. And so coming from some Scot-Irish background and some English background, and also coming from a culture of Southerners who historically enslaved Black folks. We have actual records of it in my family because where I grew up, the records are all there in the public registries and family records that are just in the special drawers of family records. And it is both something that people feel like that's the past and we're ashamed of, and also there's so much about that past that like reverberate into the present, that become a part of the systematic way things are. And I benefited from that in a lot of ways growing up. I mean, my family historically had large tracts of land, and that land was stolen. But there's not a lot of like talk about like, well, how did we get this land? Like at some point that land was violently taken, and yet some of my ancestors were of marginalized groups, right? Like in a sense, like the Irish. And so that's something Jackie and I talked about before too, because Jackie has a mix of some Scandinavian ancestry and like Irish and whatnot. And it's like what I'm seeing happening in the Israel-Palestine conflict, watching it unfold, there's so many intersections and layers of things going on. Like, and it's really ironic to me, the episode I put out with Calix in July, and how we really focus on how eugenics, which is basically this idea of there's such a thing as a pure race or higher race, or like hierarchy in that realm, how that influences how we see plants and ecologies and conservation today. And like a lot of that history of eugenics was at the expense of Jewish people. Obviously the Holocaust was influenced by the eugenics movement, right? And the marginalization of Jewish people. But what we've historically seen so much is that marginalized people, in an effort to claim identity and power and like wholeness based on their own ancestral traumas, can easily be flipped into being the same people that do that to others. And that happened in the so-called US with like people who were sent over because they weren't wanted in Europe, or they were pushed out, or they were sent because they were landless because their land was taken from them, you know, during the enclosure of the commons in parts of Europe. And of course with the Irish is like so much in the like complexity of what Irish folks had to deal with. And so many of those people settled in North America, and in the process of settling and claiming a new home and like trying to claim a sense of freedom where they didn't previously have it, and and it was taken from them, they ended up taking it from someone else. And so much of studying the history of what happened in the area where I grew up in the South, especially like conflicts like Bacon's Rebellion, which you could look up. If I remember, I'll put it in the show notes. That happened in the county where I grew up. It's like basically the aristocrats turning the poor working class white, so-called white, you know, if race is ultimately a cultural construct, but turning the poor white people against the Native American folks, even though in some ways they have had allyship. And same with like black folks and Irish folks, and like the power of those who were all marginalized allying together was intimidating and scary for those who had the power. And so what worked best is to manipulate them to turn against each other. And so I reflect on all of this in my own relationship, what I've seen happen in the lands that I exist and live on, and feel so much heartache for like how this is playing out right now. And it feels like no one knows what to actually do, because it's such an intense thing happening. Like, I mean, basically apartheid and genocide, and how our mainstream culture gaslights us. I mean, I think about this as a everyday reality of what's told to us as good is actually like fucked up. You know, to be a consumer that just keeps on consuming and to treat each other in certain ways. Like I've said things like that on the podcast before. Like we're told certain ways of being should be normal and right and good, and other ways of being are not okay. And so it's interesting how the mainstream media is handling this situation right now and how dualistic it tends to get. I feel so much heartache for Jewish people having to navigate what Israel's choosing to do with its power, which is power it's also getting from the fact that countries like the US want a strategic hand in the Middle East for basically like resource extraction reasons, and therefore are using the pain that Jewish people have experienced and their ancestral trauma and giving them the power to try to claim this land that they feel is ancestrally theirs, which this land is ancestrally a lot of people's, sometimes all at once at the same time in history, and sometimes multi-layered like ways. You know, we talk about often on the podcast and in my classes in person that ecologies never have strict lines and squares, and borders are arbitrary constructs in a lot of ways, that we're trying to draw in the past and be like, this was these people's land, they were here first. But like, were those lines actually really there? And was it ever that simple, the way we once lived as people together? Like the wovenness and fabric of being tribal entities with ethnic and religious and social cultural patterns and things that make us who we are as people were never so strictly straight in lines and in borders and divisions, and we're not meant to really exist that way ultimately. We want to be with the people that we feel familiar with and that we feel in kin with, but historically as people, there's been many times where we have woven together in our differences, and you know, a lot of the roots of what's happening feel like oppressed people acting out the pain of their ancestral trauma onto other people. But with this other layer of eugenics and xenophobia and racism that no one wants to fully admit sometimes is there when it comes to Palestinian people who are, you know, they're Arabic, but it's not that straight in line, you know, like there's Jewish people who have Arabic ethnicities, and there's also Palestinian people who are Jewish, and it's like so much complexity there. You know, I've been seeing so much online of like, what do we do? What do we do? And it feels like we really don't know what to do, like, because as a people, we can't influence our government to choose something that, even if it did, it's like it choosing to not support Israel would be it showing weakness. Though, like, there are thousands of people being killed right now in an effort to basically displace an entire group of people from their land that they're told they're not allowed to be on anymore, so that another group of people who've always wanted a place to be can be there. And in the end, it's not going to... This is setting a stage for, like, so many more years of trauma and pain that's going to play itself back out again later. And I don't see this ending well, even if what the Israelis want is like their land they feel is rightfully theirs to be just Jewish people. I don't think that would exist in a peaceful way ever. And so, yeah, it's interesting that the people with power are leveraging these multifaceted layers of like ancestral trauma in order to maintain like a foothold in the place where there's a lot of resources and money and extraction to be had. I really think that's part of the root of it. And if that wasn't a piece here, I don't think that the U.S. would be so involved, and therefore the Israelis wouldn't necessarily have all the money and ability to do what they're doing right now. And so I'm saying all this and I feel very cautious because I don't usually speak out about politics in such a direct way on the podcast. I do in my conversations in indirect ways, or like bring up questions that I feel like should be explored in the terrain of a lot of these issues. And in this case, I just feel like it's super important to say something and connect it to the kinds of things that we talk about on this podcast. I mean, the deeper roots of the conservation movement are connected to genocide and the displacement of indigenous peoples. And this is like so connected to what Calix was sharing in the last episode too, like in the roots of conservation and wilderness are connected to eugenics, which is also connected to the Holocaust, which is also connected to the deep, deep pain and trauma that Jewish people are feeling from what happened to their ancestors. And it's also connected to the reality of colorism and the reality of othering people we don't understand, the reality of seeing other human beings who are different than us as lesser than or kin to animals that aren't as human as other people are, and therefore we can justify genocide by not seeing people as people we can relate to or empathize with or connect to. And that's what eugenics is good at. It's good at dehumanizing people. It's good at numbing us from the deepest sense of moral compass. And how do you feel like people manage to kill and murder so many indigenous peoples without a blink of an eye, because they actually felt as though the land belonged to them and that they could tend it better, or that the people who were here were simply just other animals that existed on this landscape. That's written in a lot of the language that you see out there. Both the fear of the wild and the romanticism of the wild is connected into this whole thing that's happening. And so I'd like for you to even question for yourself the word terrorist and what it really actually means we just throw out these words, and this happens with ecology and plants and invasive plant stuff. We just throw out these words, but what does it really mean? Like, what does terrorist really mean? Like, we even trying to understand, like, it's an easy way to create an enemy and an othering, especially in people who have a certain culture and who have a certain reason why they are trying to defend their rights as people to exist on land in connection to land, but yet denying that critical thought, denying that looking deeper, 5 steps deeper into seeing why is this even happening in the first place on all sides of it, is not doing justice to any humanity in the situation, and not doing justice to the land itself. And so I would ask you to really look at, like, what is terrorist? I think it's a strategically created word in order to create an enemy in a situation where we are encouraged to not think deeper about what's actually fucking happening and why. What drives people to be at such desperation? I really am looking at, like, the horror of what Israelis are doing to Palestinian people and being like, what could possibly motivate these people to be so horrible right now? What could possibly motivate them to do that? Like, it is horrible. And, like, what is it? What is it deep down in there? Like, what's there? Is it just pure evil? Like, this is something I talked about a lot when I was in college studying philosophy and law and, like, religious studies. Like, we would talk about, like, how do we determine as a culture what we decide is just pure evil and what is insanity. And we live in a world that is constantly encouraging us to do things that are insane. And what do we blame? Insanity, in a sense, has so many influences, and evil we don't even really know what to do with, because it's almost as if it comes from some deep well within, and then you ask yourself, like, why would evil even exist, in the first place? And so I think about a lot of these things and just want it all to stop. Like, again, last night I've recorded this intro in several pieces, and I have thinned it out, and then I've recorded some more and thinned it out, because I know I tend to do really long intros that almost should be just separate episodes sometimes, and trying to not do too much. And also, like, this is a really hard thing to talk about, and I'll feel often like I'm gonna mess up saying the wrong thing, and this is a divided issue. I'm really watching people that I have been friends with, like, be very, very in support of Israel. And, like, of course, the mainstream news is, everything is tinted around, like, downplaying the genocide happening in Palestinian people right now, and like making Israeli people and Jewish people the victims solely. It's a multifaceted situation, like I've tried to talk about here in this intro, and it's like, yeah, I've been just scared of speaking out about stuff like this, not because I don't know what is right. It's just that it's not a linear thing to speak to, and it's nerve-wracking, and also, like, what's happening right now has me thinking about so many things, like, and how history repeats itself, and how does this apply to what we talk about on the Ground Shots podcast? How does this apply to how we relate to landscapes and ecology and so-called nature and plants, like, and each other in community with plants? It has everything to do with it, because if we don't talk about these pieces that are 5 layers deep, that make the conversations that we have today about landscapes what they are, then we're never going to get at the heart of it all. And so this is my attempt at commenting on it in some way as someone with a public platform, but at the same time, there's so much I don't know, and I want to admit that, and, like, I can't possibly comprehend or even begin to think I know what it could be like to be in this situation. But I just want to say free Palestine, and I wish I could give the sense of peace that I find when I'm in the woods to the children I'm seeing scared on Instagram, who are in the middle of a war zone they can't get out of by choice even. And wishing that we wouldn't do this to each other. Like, why do we need to do this to each other? I'm gonna stop at that and get going with this conversation with Jacquie Hill on Ponderosa Pine. Thank you for listening to this reflection and this. I know that we've been all hearing and seeing so much about this for a bit now, and I think for some people it's the first time they're really, really starting to understand that this has been a conflict that's been happening for a while now, decades, and realizing it's a little late to have done anything. It's a little late to say free Palestine on Instagram. And I want to leave it with that. Maybe in the next episode there'll be more I feel like I can get into on this subject, or maybe it'll be a separate episode, or maybe I'll interview some people who know more than me that's connected to this. I have some ideas for that, but for now we're gonna get into this combo about the medicine of Ponderosa Pine and Jacquie's research there, and I really hope you appreciate this geek out, and thanks so much for listening to the Ground Shots podcast. All right, y'all, happy listening. Like, how is Ponderosa Pine connected to social justice intersections? There's probably a way we'll figure out how to pull that in.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, like, one of the things about cell line research, right, is it's like there's so many ethical issues, especially when it was first becoming a viable research path. It's like there's a cell line called the Gila cell line, which is a black woman from the South who had cancer in the 50s. And those researchers took her cells. What's her name? Henrietta. Oh, I wrote it down, actually.
So we could,
because I was thinking
link
about
something in the show notes.
Yeah.
Because I like to do that in my, so people can further research and look into this stuff.
Yeah, because it's like, that's a big deal. Henrietta Lacks. And her cells are the first immortalized human cell line.
Was it consented?
No. Not consented.
Well, they did plenty of shit not consented to black women, especially. It's so much good that can come out of medical research and scientific research. And then, on plants or with plants or using all kinds of things, but it's like, there's definitely some ethical, moral stuff that comes in. It's a big conversation because you think it's for the betterment of humanity, but that comes into, like, philosophical, moral quandaries around, like, is a sacrifice of the small thing better for the greater, or is it morally wrong no matter what, and which of those things should we hold as our gauge, and then it's still practiced today, like, experiments on animals. I mean, I don't know, a lot of the herbal research, it's still being done on animals, like mice.
Oh man, some of the research, like, I was curious at one point about how different volatile oils are actually interacting with the inflammatory pathway. And it's like, I read one research study where it literally was like 12 rats were sacrificed and their gut linings were removed immediately. And it's like it's like, at what point do you really want to be a part of that? And not even to mention that particular research study was something like, they were studying the use of Angelica sinensis and its ability to stimulate blood flow. And so they used, like, the leaves in a 10%, I want to say it was a 10% methanol solution. It's like, okay, well, the leaves aren't what's traditionally used. 10% isn't, like, either decoct it or do a tincture, but it's like, so there's hardly any herbal influence in a lot of the research that's going down. So it's like
they're just isolated
Right.
worlds.
So it's like
Well,
whatever
there's money funding it, and people might look up at something about like I don't know, like that disconnect from the plant itself. Like I
Right.
think that's partly why I going to herb schools and stuff. I mean, I went to herb schools that were more field, got you out in the field more, but like there's some that don't, you know. I think both can be good, but doing one or the other, one then the other or whatever is like essential, because if you're going to be working as an herbalist doing things that look like being a pharmacist where you're making compounds to give to people, and that's how it looks in a lot of country, you know, like
Right.
in Germany or something, you know, it is, to me, I think, super helpful to integrate the live plant in the context of where it is into that somehow. And like I was like, gosh, this is so compartmentalized, it still
Right,
feels so
it's-
allopathic.
it's almost like
How can ecology be integrated into practice, into understanding of plants,
Yeah.
into like the super science realm? Like I think someone like Lisa Ganora is really great in that, because she's really in the lab, but she also,
she's a real bridger.
yeah, for sure.
You know, like my research professor was like a real bridger. Really knowledgeable in all things research, but also like somebody who knows the plants thoroughly in their setting, in their personality, in their whole thing.
Who
you
was
know?
your?
So that was Caleb Lund.
Don't know.
Yeah, he's pretty under the radar, but
Cool.
super, like, those are the people that I think stand out to me the most, is the people that can bridge, because you don't want to like throw everything out just to pursue one plant path, because then when you're in a pharmacological space in a clinic and all you're doing is isolating rosmarinic extract, you know, and then you're missing out on the whole complexity of the plant, let alone where the plant is from and the habitat that the plant originally comes from, or where it thrives or naturalizes itself.
I think about with ground shot stuff, I'm just like contextualizing the plant in a system. I remember when Thai Sophia was called Thai Sophia Institute, and now it's called Maryland School of Integrative Health, I think, out of Baltimore area.
Right.
And it might be mostly online now. I don't know, I haven't checked in with it lately, but when I was working at the Botanical Sanctuary through the United Plant Savers that's in Ohio, Paul Strauss, one of the herbalists associated with that sanctuary, has this land next door, and he hosts herb schools. Like sometimes Seven Song comes down there, Quarry Pine, but I don't think Bastyr really takes field trips a little far, but Thai Sophia would go and take their students every year, and that was often the only opportunity some of these people got to be with the plants in real life, like other than in the herb garden there. There are some students, obviously, that go there that have had tons of other experience, but there's a bunch of students who've just, it's a career change. They never have seen any of these plants, and or even camped or anything. Not to say you have to camp. I don't want to be, you know, there's a level of like that's not always accessible to everybody, but like we were there, and so we all just did class together, us interns and them, and I was like, wow, this is such an interesting thing, and I'm so glad they get to come here and do this too, because Paul is like pretty like amazing.
It's so important. Like by the time I got to Bastyr, I had been studying, I mean, not very seriously studying wild edible plants as like a kid and a teenager backpacking a lot, and then it was like I hit my late teens and my 20s, and it was just all plants all the time, you know. And then going to Bastyr, there were a lot of people who were either fresh, like that was their, you know, they were like 20-year-olds, and like every range of experience in the wilderness, from like, you know, badass hiking through parts of the PCT to like never doing anything. And then that's what one of the things that was awesome about Bastyr is like it's in the what is it, the Saint Edward State Park, or
it's in a state park.
Yeah, and it's lush and gorgeous, and it's right on the Washington Lake, and you know, and then there's parts of it like every single quarter there's plant ID and horticulture, which Crystal Hamby, who's my jam, she was the teacher for the plant ID, and it was like walks into the woods, like from the classroom into the woods, and
that's great.
I just can't imagine not doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I get that happens. But that's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know who's teaching it what was Thai Sophia anymore, but the teachers there are really great. Bev and Claire is one of them, James, is it Snow? James. A couple really great teachers there. It's not like, it's just the way that it's set up. And I mean, I think it's changed.
And it could be proximity, like, Bastyr's location.
Yeah.
I mean,
Baltimore is a whole different, you drive far enough, you can get to the woods, but it's, I think being close enough to a population center. But then the Vermont School of Integrative Herbalism is fucking badass too. Oh, I just said that word. Well, I guess it might be an explicit episode. Maybe I'll cut it out. But they're up in a small town and they're really classroom oriented too. But then they have access to woods and
and like
gardens.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is important to talk about, I think a lot of people hear Bastyr and just think like elitism or privilege, and I'm not saying that those things aren't a part of it, but the only reason I was able to go to Bastyr is because it was an actual accredited program and I could get student loans.
There's not a lot of that. Yeah.
Like I couldn't go to the Colorado School of Clinical Herbalism, even though Lisa was one of the people who was like, you should really go to Bastyr, even when I came to do a site visit at her school. So I've always really cherished her for that. But like I couldn't go. I was already a super young mom with 2 kids and really wanted to I was like, I'm gonna work in the herbal field and I don't know what it means. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know exactly what path. But Bastyr was the only place I could go because I could get student loans.
Yeah.
So it's like...
The U.S. doesn't have a lot of university level education around herbal medicine, and it's not really always integrated or rarely integrated into med school. Like some people I know who've gone to naturopathic school, the real deal naturopathic, not like some states where there's a weird certificate you can get that's not a thing.
Everybody at Bastyr called them undies.
Undies.
Oh.
We'll probably cut that out too.
Yeah. But I know. I'm all for all the spectrums of however people want to get on their path.
I know, but a lot of people go to naturopathic school for 4 years. And it's really merging mainstream medical and herbal, and some people feel like it's not enough herbal because they're going to be accepting insurance probably and
so it's
pressures in that realm,
right?
That make it really difficult to figure out how to integrate all the things these connections to the real plants and appreciating folk medicine, because indigenous peoples and our indigenous ancestors played with plants and we're co-evolved with plants. I mean, plants are what it means to be human. We're made of plants.
Right.
We're made by them. In that episode I did with Lisa, it's crazy basically how she lays out how we're made up. We are molecularly affected by plants, and just so it's
magic.
Yeah. It is.
When I really sometimes sit and think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's magic.
Yeah.
Right there.
The fact that we have to do this workaround thing now to come back to the plants for the mainstream, for allopathic medicine to
justify.
Seriously, there's so much wrapped in that too, around racism or cultural, the stuff, just not taking seriously. Gosh, there's so many layers of this.
Yeah.
The fact that a lot of places don't take seriously midwifery. The fact that folk herbalism is considered snake medicine, whatever. But I'm well, what were we doing for thousands and thousands of years? So much of what we know about plants comes from people who held on to that knowledge despite everything. And it's just it's weird to me that that blinder is put on. I'm always thinking about the blinders and the lenses and the things that we're looking through, and yet we're in the world we're in. There's so many benefits to mainstream medical stuff too, and yet I think it would be so great if we had more integration of herbs, but I also don't want the plants to be made less accessible to people if it got put into hospitals or if it got put into medical practices, because then say, like, because of the fact that doctors are already having to navigate, like, the fact that they have to sell a product sometimes to actually make a living, what would that look like if herbs were integrated into medical practice? Like, would they be patented and made illegal to go wildcraft?
Yeah, it would. It's like,
you know, grow or what?
It's like we'd need to continue on a big shift to make it be more of a holistic picture, because it's like the minute we start isolating constituents, you know, it's like you lose out on so much efficacy of the herb. You know, like berberine's a great example. Oh, everybody's like, oh, you take berberine for bacterial infections, and it's like, yeah, but you know what you're really missing out on? So this is one of the things that, like, is a soapbox of Yarnell's, when Eric Yarnell's, when he's tincturing Oregon grapefruit, he'll put, for, like, if he's doing 100 grams of leaf, there'll be like 10 grams, or 100 grams of root bark, he'll put 10 grams of leaf, because the synergy of the plant. It's been found that there's something within the leaf that actually blocks the efflux pumps of the bacteria. So it's like you can pump antibacterial crap into them all day long, but they have efflux pumps and they'll just shunt it right back out. But there's something in the leaf that blocks those efflux pumps, and then it's a much more effective medicine.
Like golden seal, I think I've heard some stuff around how the leaves have pretty good medicine too, just like the root, and could be, and ginseng as well. Like, these are woodland medicinals that grow wild in the southeast or in the east, that I guess some of those grow up in the upper Midwest too, but like that's like about the roots. But there could be, if we were over harvesting them, which both of those get over harvested, maybe we could like lay off and like just harvest leaves for a while.
Right.
Or, you know, there could be other ways we could tend them and stuff too and still get the root. But it's like, wait, what about the leaf? But there's sometimes we have these cultural connotations with parts of plants too that are like, I know ginseng root is associated with, ginseng, American ginseng is a yang tonic, more masculine and like, you know, gives you boners and like adaptogenic like strength, you know, is the root. There's all this Chinese, or like, you know, where traditional Chinese medicine is practiced far away from here, you know, there's a lot of association with the root and the shape of it, and like intensity of the root in association with how strong the medicine will be for the yang, you know, which is like, whoa, even though you could just harvest a tiny pinch of the root, or you could harvest the leaves, but that isn't worth anything compared to the whole root. It's like wild burly roots, you know,
roots that look like people.
Fascinating,
right? Like it is
the
so
cultural layers of all this stuff too. But I mean, in some ways we have reasons for doing things that we don't know why, but they've been passed on for a reason. And of course, we have a lot more people in the world now that want to consume ginseng, so maybe it didn't matter before. But,
right.
You know.
Yeah, I don't know. It would almost be like there'd have to be some level of like such change that it would be like a standardization to be like, oh yeah, for your place as a person in the world, you have to have a plot of land and you have to grow 10 plants that are beneficial for your constitution and your health. Mm-hmm. You know, because it's like it would have to be such a big shift.
Yeah.
To think about how that would look in hospitals or anything like that.
But it's possible. So many things have shifted even in the last 10 years. The fact that cannabis is more normalized than it is.
Yeah. Sometimes things really do just like change practically overnight.
You're like, dude, wow. Well, before we keep going, I wanted to step back a little bit and just get you to introduce yourself, because we have never did that as we just ventured into this conversation. But we're in Paonia, Colorado. That's where you don't live officially in Paonia, but outside of it.
I'm officially a Somerset resident.
Somerset. And, but we're sitting by Airstream on it's probably not as cold out as it was earlier this morning. Cold winter day, It's beautiful, snowy,
Bluebird day.
sunny by my wood stove that's making me burn up right now. So, like, you are from Colorado originally, but you've lived other places, and Bastyr is obviously not in Colorado, but maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit and, like, some of where you're coming from with your work with plants and some of your thought processes around it, and then we'll venture into your research that we wanted to focus on mainly in this conversation.
Sure. So I was actually born in Michigan.
Okay.
But we moved here when I was like 7. Okay. So maybe that's where my love of deep, cold winters comes from. And swimming in the Great Lakes, you know. But yeah, so I've been here since I was about 7. Mostly lived on the Front Range and up in the Central Rockies as I was being raised. And then, yeah, let's see. Then I just had always had a love of plants. I sometimes joke that I think the reason why I fell in love with plants was because we did a lot of backpacking and hiking, both in my family and with my friend group.
That's cool.
And I'm just not a very fast person. So I've always wondered if my love of plants came from, like, needing to take a break while everybody, like, charged on, and then, like, noticing the things around me. It was always very interesting to me, growing up in those circles, how little people actually knew about the plants. So it was like, get to the lake, get to the spot where we're going. Or, like, hut trips, it was never a noticing of the evergreens and dead stick botany or what was left or what was coming. So that was just really always interesting to me. And then when I was in my mid-20s and I became pregnant with my first daughter, it was like, that was kind of when things really got more serious. Went from, like, goofing off, thinking herbs are cool, wild plants are cool, how fun is it to put, you know, alliums in your breakfast burrito while you're backpacking, to, like, actual components to my health. And I remember, you know, going in for my prenatal visit at, like, you know, 32 weeks or something like that. And I had these things that I wanted to talk about, interventions I wanted to avoid. And I remembered bringing up, it was in combination, a particular intervention I wanted to avoid and being able to have an infusion. And it was like, I was told, nope, like, both those things we'll see. That's another thing that has changed a lot in the last 10 years, you know. Now you go in with a birth plan and they work with you. It was like, I was at the tail end of the time when it's like, here's my birth plan. And they're like, we can't guarantee anything. And so I switched to a midwife right then. And that was when, like, her name was Nedra, and she was just the best. And she really worked with me to find things that were going to be useful to me in labor and things that were going to keep me going in labor. So yeah, then we moved when my daughter Alma was like 9 months old. A friend of mine started a farm in upstate New York, and we had kind of kicked around the idea of thinking we wanted to be farmers. So we're like, maybe we should go work on this farm first, before we totally dive into that. And that was really like, I had found a few more herb classes to take. The wild availability of just herbs out there was mind-blowing to me. We had this place that we called Middle Earth, and it was this ring of willows, and it had everything in it. There was, like, chickweed and self-heal and nettles, and, like, I mean, it was just so full of everything. And that was, like, the moment that I was like, I'm pursuing a plant path.
Where was this farm?
In Madison, New York.
Okay.
So, like, south of Utica. Just gorgeous. It was so gorgeous. But yeah, and that's actually, the first time I ever talked to Lisa Ganora was because I was on the farm, so I called her. And then when we came back to Colorado, went and took a couple sit-in classes at the Colorado School of Clinical Herbalism. And that's when she kind of nudged me. She saw maybe my nerdiness and nudged me to go pursue Bastyr. So I applied, went sight unseen, and we moved to Washington. At that time, we had 2 daughters, and it was like, we're doing the thing.
That's cool. Moved your whole family for that. Yeah. That's awesome. Your partner's trooper then.
He's a real trooper. He was super supportive. It was like one of those things that all the synchronicities just lined up. Like, we were looking at moving there, and we're like, holy crap, rent's like $2,200 for a house. So we were like, maybe we can buy a house. And the bank let us buy a house. And then we were having a hard time finding a house, and then I started looking and digging in a little deeper, and we found a house at 3425, and that was the address we lived at when I was looking. And then come to find out that Allon's work had an office near Everett. It was like all the little things just kind of lined up, and we moved there, and yeah, it was... So I went to Bastyr. We were in Washington for 3 years.
Was that how many years the program was?
The program's 2 years, but I really wanted to stay for an additional year. I got hired on at Herbal Botanicals.
Oh, cool.
So I worked, and Eric Yarnell is like, you know, he's my hero. I think he's so smart, so intelligent. But what's funny is he holds none of the folkloric storytelling, magical side of herbs that I do. So we've had funny interactions.
It's also a cool thing to come together with your different layers, you know?
Yeah. No, it's awesome. Because he would hear me out on different things, you know? But then he's just like, no, I don't adhere to that thought process. But open to have those conversations, you know? Yeah, so then I worked for COVID came, so I didn't get my full year in at Heron, but then it was kind of like, you know, do we stay in, do we live in Washington now, or do we move back home? And we were in, like, the heart of the city of Everett, so it's like if we were going to stay in Washington, we would have had to move to somewhere that, like, supported our values and how we like to spend our time. And anyway, we'd been eyeing the North Fork Valley for, like, 10 years. That was always the goal, to move here. So I actually did part of my practicum at Elderberries, just to, like, check out the place and make sure this was where we could live. And then COVID happened, and we came. Cool. We thought we'd live in Paonia, but we couldn't really afford it. So we're like, yo, Somerset, what up?
Yeah. Well, I was Paonia that unaffordable now.
Yeah.
You luck out. Yeah.
I think that was kind of the lousy part, is that because of COVID, we happened to come at the same time as everybody and their mother. And we had gotten a couple properties under contract. Like, there was one that we got under contract. It was like 15 acres. But there were, like, hay fields, and, you know, all of a sudden we're like, okay, I guess, are we going to be harvesting hay, or now we're hauling water, now we're, you know, these payments are going to be huge. We're both going to have to get, like, bona fide 40-hour-a-week jobs. We're like, or that little armpit town keeps calling our name. We could buy something up there for a fraction of the price and have the spaciousness in our lives.
By the mine there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the mine's in reclamation, and, I mean, that's a whole other
conversation.
Host of things, yeah. So I work at the water district up there, so I'm real involved with that. But it feels like the right place. It's like you know, I don't have to have a regular 40-hour work week because we made sacrifices to, you know, for the land we wanted there to be in Somerset. And I think we're right where we need to be.
That's cool.
Somerset needs people who believe in it, and we believe in it.
So you did some really cool research while you were at Bastyr, and I read some of it ahead of time, and I was like, whoa, I don't understand some of this. And I love Ponderosa Pine. There's Ponderosa Pine in this region too, Colorado. And so it's not out east, you know, it's a pine that is primarily in the west, in the southwest, Pacific Northwest, California. And you have shared with me before that you had this opportunity at Bastyr to basically do research in a way that you wouldn't get to if you weren't there, with all the labs and all the, like, mentorship and stuff. And so, like, why did you choose to study that plant in particular, and like
Yeah, so that came about. So that's one of the other things about Bastyr that's amazing is there's really amazing field classes. I really was gonna swear so hard there and I didn't. But the field classes are amazing. So one of them that's really awesome is that takes place over the whole summer quarter. It's one weekend in different parts of the state. So there's like one weekend in the Olympic Peninsula, one weekend in the Cascades, one weekend kind of over, where the Cascades start to go into the more plains, like around the Twisp area.
Okanagan.
The Okanagan forest. And so it was, and then there's one other, so it's 4 weeks, or like 4-day weekends. 4 4-day weekends. And anyway, in one of them, Yarnell leads those trips, and so it's awesome because you get to ask him questions for days on end. And I think by the end he was always like, Jackie, it's time for you to go home.
No.
But we were on this one excursion, and we were walking by all these Ponderosa pines that were just, their exudate was everywhere. It was like pitch everywhere. And he kind of just started on this rant about how he really wished that people would see Ponderosa pine for what it is and how valuable of a medicine it is, and we could start using that instead of using frankincense, and stopping using this plant that's not only in at risk and of endangerment, but also people who are in war-torn areas, and they need money, and how can you expect people in those situations to act ethically when it's a matter of like feeding your family, to sell this resin. But anyway, it was kind of just a long rant of his, and we were getting ready to go into the second year of the program that culminates in a research project. And my lab partners, Rochelle Fisher and Lauren Flanagan and I, we were oscillating, right, between something cool like, testing constituents in different types of water, like if you did an infusion in distilled water versus structured water versus, mineral spring water. Or, you could do anything, right? But then we had this conversation because I'd really been thinking a lot about the Ponderosa pitch ever since that conversation. And we're like, well, screw it. When are we ever going to be able to do in vitro cell research ever? And so we decided to do it.
Whoa.
And that was, all three of us still to this day are just like, that was, why did we do that?
What does in vitro mean?
In vitro is, I believe it's Latin for in the glass. So it's like cell line research in test tubes.
Whoa.
Yeah. And, it's like, for the three of us, it was a lot of discussion and like, okay, is this really what we want to do? Is this, because that's crazy. I'm a magical broad, and I'm like always thinking about, earth spirits, and it's like, oh, now I'm going to go in a lab with sterile equipment and pipette things into wells under a hood. But, so we did it. Because, I'm never going to have that opportunity again. So
Maybe.
There's one thing some people, some of my classmates thrived in the lab, and they're like, oh, I want to do more research. And I was definitely, I'm a bit of a bridger, so like I love science. I love thinking about like critical questions and thinking about what would happen if you did it slightly different versus this way. But like at my core, I'm really a storytelling, mythological, magical being loving. And I just couldn't see myself doing that. But I know that now because I did
you went
that
there,
research.
played in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ponderosa Pine, there's so much tradition too in the medicine in that tree, and it's like, well, lots of people have used it
That's the frustrating part, right, about the research. It's like every time there's well done research that legitimizes a plant use, it's like, yeah, well, we have thousands of years of anecdotal evidence suggesting that it does that, you know? Like even writing the abstract for the research, it's like so funny that we have to research something and legitimize it when it's like, there's that Daniel Mowerman book that's the Ethnobotany of North America, and it's like hundreds of accounts of different uses of Ponderosa being used for things, you know, that with a modern lens you can be like, oh yeah, it's got carine and alpha pinene and beta pinene, and oh, that supports that use. It's like, can't we bridge that together? So that was some of my baggage about the research. Like, I wanted to do it so I could have the experience, but it's also like, we have so many years of indigenous and anecdotal evidence of these plants working this way.
Have you heard of the Native American... I sent you a link to it yesterday, but maybe you haven't checked your email. What is it? The Native American sacred trees. I always get it mixed up. I'll link it in the show notes because it's really interesting. Sacred...
yeah, I actually looked at it this morning.
Yeah.
It's like the North American Sacred Trees
Association or something. I can't
something
remember.
like that.
But this older man who's really cool, who lives on the Front Range, Che, who's a scientist and also, you know, he talks about the Fibonacci sequence and spirals and how DNA goes this way or that way and the plants do these things this direction or that direction. You know, it's really... But he's really interested in Ponderosa Pine, and that organization is basically documenting trees that have been altered by indigenous peoples in the past that still are standing as either wayfaring trees, like waypoints, like guideposts and travel, or for medicine harvesting, and the ways that they would alter the trees to extract certain medicines out of them.
Right.
And so sometimes you can tell by looking at the tree why it was altered, for what purpose.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get, even I think, and correct me if anybody listening hears this and thinks that I'm wrong about it, but like I think that the state like archaeologist for Colorado isn't unsure if they think it's real, you know. So there's a lot of like not considering that this is real, but like the people that are mainly a part of this are Native folks and university level. Some people are working in universities, and
right.
And then there's a lot of landowners across Colorado that have them on their land, and they come to the meetings and stuff, and they're just wanting to figure out how to protect them, or like, you know, because it's a living archaeology, it's a botanical archaeology, it's a remnant of the past that is really important to consider like protecting, and that these things are really amorphous and hard to, I don't know, it's all connected to all this stuff, I think, but it's like, why is it that hard to take seriously that these would be around, you know? So their thing is just raising awareness about it, but the medicine harvesting is a part of the work. It's like, they even like deconstruct some of them, like, okay, they cut it, they did this alteration here, then here, and it's like, whoa. And talking to Che about it is really fascinating, because he's like, I have some on my land, and it's like crazy, because then there's all these other plants sometimes growing around them that are culturally significant, that you think, well, were they also planted near some of these trees, because there are special trees for gathering, like more monarda there, and more, you know, whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there was one photo where it was like you could see that the bark had been stripped, but then it almost looked like it was, and this could be my imagination, the storyteller in me, but it looked like you could almost see where the bark was peeled in a succession, like maybe in that particular region, that tree was the one that was like where you'd go for your pitch. Mm-hmm. Like, you wouldn't collect from every tree, you'd have like one that you took care of really well, and that you harvested from really thoughtfully and cleanly, so it didn't get pathogens and infections. But yeah, I did have a chance to look at that, and
they have a conference every fall, usually in the Front Range somewhere,
Yeah.
but somewhere different every time, where there might be some nearby you can go walk and look at. But, you know,
Yeah.
Nikki's our friend, mutual friend Nikki. Oh, wait, have you met Nikki?
I don't know Nikki.
I've just told you about her.
Yeah.
She's friends
She's
with
my
Che.
mutual friend now.
Yeah. She's been wanting to go to this conference too, but at some point it'll make sense to field trip over to it to see what this deeper, like, thing is all about.
Yeah.
But anyways, Ponderosa Pine, ecologically, it can grow in a lot of different situations, I think. It's like its own little keystone tree in some ecologies. Yeah, and it's like, I wouldn't say you would find it at the super high elevation.
It's like it's those pockets that it occupies. It's like when it finds a spot and then it just explodes. You know, like between Pagosa Springs and Durango, that section is just so thick with it. It's so big and bold and beautiful, and, you know, its ability to survive fires, like quite the opposite of juniper, where junipers are just going to get wiped out, like ponderosas with their big, thick, corky bark. You know, like the place where we went and harvested for the research, it was just like ravaged by fire a couple years previous, and just all the trunks just blackened.
But
and
they
then
survived.
Yeah, and then they're just big, beautiful, full-grown, stately, like, found a way, made it happen.
Sometimes they don't, if the fire is crazy enough, I guess, but...
Right, or if it's like a split.
Yeah.
Like if the trunk split.
I know the Colorado Trail we saw a lot in the beginning. The closest to Boulder, the part of the trail is lower down, and there's lots of ponderosa forest we walk through with lots of cool plants underneath, growing in meadows, you know.
Right.
But then once we got above 10,000 feet, we pretty much didn't see them much more after that.
Where the ponderosas are, that's my elevation. Like, I don't want to be at 10,000, but I don't want to be like at 7. I want to be like 8,500.
Yeah.
Me and ponderosas could be chilling there.
And then in California, when I was in the Sierras, they are in the foothills, but they're a little lower down than, say, Jeffrey pine, which isn't out here, I'm pretty sure. No, it's not out here. It's like it hybridizes with ponderosa pretty easily. But Jeffrey will be growing just a little higher up in the foothills. Like, ponderosa is a little bit lower, and then it's Jeffrey and sugar pine, and then you go on and you get high, white bark pine, all these higher elevation pines. Right. But I feel like I see it more as one that wants to stay a little lower there. Yeah. It's so interesting to observe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, even sometimes you'll see the random ponderosa, like, a little bit lower down here. And it just is strange when you're like, oh, you made it. It's pretty low for you, but you seem to be doing okay. But
yeah. So, what did you primarily test in the research? Like, what part of the plant, and why did you choose that part to experiment with?
I do want to preface this with, I am definitely no expert. Like, this was...
Neither am I.
Yeah, but just to, like, clarify, it was a really cool experience, but so we chose to go with the pitch, primarily because, I had lots of experience using pitch effectively in oils, tinctures. I used to have a exposed part of my tooth, and I used to just like to get the dry bits and flake it off and mash it together and just stick it right on there.
Wow.
And it would relieve the tooth pain, like, instantly. So it was like the combination of that, and then, trying to honor that conversation with Yarnell. So using the pitch in the same way that frankincense is used, trying to, like, replicate the usage to create the conversation of, like, let's stop using frankincense if Ponderosa pine pitch is a good alternative.
So what are ways that people use frankincense and or Ponderosa pitch?
So it's like, frankincense is mostly used for, like, body aches and pains, arthritic joints, and I think most people are using it in either like powdered capsuled form, essential oil form, which essential oils are a whole other, side conversation. But so we did the pitch, and we did a 30% extract unfiltered, 30% extract filtered, just to see if the actual presence of the pitch had an impact. And then a 90% extract. We started off with a water extract in it just to have a full spectrum, and it was like this. We can't even, we can't even use this.
So like for people who don't know anything about herbs or herbal extraction, usually resins don't extract too well in water, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They would be a high alcoholic extraction or an oil extraction. Like in the case of the tooth powder, the whole reason it works so well is because it's, not water soluble. So you put it in your mouth and put it on the tooth. It's not just going to wash away like other powders would. But so yeah.
A tooth powder that contains the powder pitch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why it's so effective, because it just is like a Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
I really recommend people try that for toothaches. That's a game changer.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so we did those extracts, and I don't know how much you want me to talk about the rest of that.
Well, I guess before we get into a little bit of geeky details about it, what medicinal properties are talked about with Ponderosa pitch that you were trying to test and see if you can measure it in this lab-oriented way? Like, for people who know nothing about it, when we mentioned a few things, it's somewhat analgesic. I didn't even really realize that.
Right.
Pine pitch across many species have commonality in their medicinal benefits. But Ponderosa specific has a certain set of things going on that maybe isn't the same than pinyon pine or, some other pine, lodgepole pine or whatever. What are some of the ways that people have used it, and how did that translate into your testing? What were you trying to prove something,
So I guess
I've read some of the stuff that you wrote, but
I guess the quick bullet point is that we were trying to prove that it interferes with the inflammation process. Inflammatory pathways, because
they manifest all kinds of ways in
right,
our bodies, right?
Right, and inflammation at its core is a good thing, right? When you get a wound, you want inflammation, you want cytokines, you want all those white blood cells to show up. You want macrophages there, because if you get a cut and there's bacteria or pathogens or even plant material, whatever, you want macrophages to show up, because they will gobble up that material and remove it from the site. So you want inflammation. But then what happens is inflammation that gets carried away can be detrimental, So people with rheumatoid arthritis or gout or, any of the number of inflammatory conditions, you want there to be some control in that. You want to be able to allow the positive inflammation, but you want to stop that secondary, if inflammation gets out of control, it can cause damage to the tissues in the area. So you want to be able to quelch it at some point.
Yeah, it shouldn't just stay.
Right. You don't want, when people talk about cytokine storms, that's inflammation that's out of control.
That's been used to refer to COVID infections.
And even people when they get really bad flus, it's the thing that really takes you down is the cytokine storm, because it's too much, and then there's, the viral shedding within your body that needs to be cleared out. But that's a whole different set of things. So really, we were trying to prove that Ponderosa pine could interact with the inflammatory pathways and help calm inflammation.
Which, again, you said there's anecdotal evidence that this is the case, the fact that it's been used for wounds, for inflammation, for pain.
Yeah. For gut infections,
for
gum health, for topical wounds, joint pain. Really, that Daniel
staph,
Daniel Mowerman book
is
goes on the uses. But then it's also key to understand, like, so when you think about Ponderosa Pine, right, like really big stately Ponderosa Pines, they never have branches to the ground. You know, they shed those lower branches, and that's what makes it a prime candidate for collecting pitch. Like lodgepoles don't produce pitch in the same way. You know, pinyon pine produces pitch, but again, not in the same volume, not in the same, you know, and maybe, and I don't know as much about pinyon and its indigenous use for people of like moving further southwest. So maybe for them it's a panacea, kind of like how Ponderosa is. But the thing with any pine that exudes this large amount of pitch is it's composed of a ton of volatile oils. So, like, that's what essential oils are, is the concentrated oils. But so any pitch that has that amount of concentrated oils is going to have an impact on bacteria, you know. So, like, there's a lot of discussion of Ponderosa pine pitch being used for, like, gut infections when you have, like, an out-of-control bacterial population. It's like the volatile oils are totally disrupting the cell walls of the bacteria, you know, like
antibacterial.
Right. Volatile oils, like when you think about the gripe that goes on with that sort of digestive issue, it's because those volatile oils in your GI lining are going in and interacting with each cell. And a lot of times, like cramping, they can help with cramping because they just get in there and they alter, like, the way a muscle is going to be contracting or the way a spasm is going to happen. And it's like the same thing. So if you put it on topically, all those volatile oils are going to get absorbed and, like, go in and really interact with tissues and interact with all of the inflammatory components that are in there.
Why do, you know, I'm asking this too, considering that the audience has different levels of understanding about these things, but why would a pine exude pitch that's harvestable? And it comes in different forms. Like, it could be really hard, and these things depend on the age or how, all these things, but sometimes it's like hard as a rock. It's falling on the ground. Sometimes it's like dripping down the tree. Like, what's the point of it exuding that in the first place? Or, like, why would it be there, you know?
I mean, there's a twofold answer, right? Like, when the Ponderosa loses its branches, it puts out pitch to kind of like a scab.
Mm-hmm.
But then sometimes I'm like, you see pines with pitch coming out in the most
random places.
Yes.
Like, why?
So it's like, is that reflective of a really wet year and the tree was able to produce more? You know, like, as it's, I always get phloem and xylem, phloem flows. So, like, when it's carrying the water in the phloem, if it's a really wet year, it could produce more pitch. I mean, that to me that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the blood of the tree in a way. It protects it from disease, to cover up its wounds. Yeah, I mean, it's a medicine for the tree itself. Like, it's its own Band-Aid, you know? And it's our Band-Aid. It's cool,
their Band-Aid,
right?
It's our Band-Aid. And then it brings in, like, questions about, you know, with the pinions and their suffering. Like, I have some friends who have land over on Fruitland Mesa, and it's like the first year I went to collect, it was plentiful and the trees seemed to be doing great. And so I harvested from, like, every 10th tree. Or maybe even more than that, like every 20th tree.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year I went and it was like, oh, interesting. You know, the health of the population has changed. Maybe I'm just going to get a little bit. And then it's like the most recent time I went out was like, maybe I shouldn't even get any.
Because pinyon pines are dying from a bark beetle really fast. I mean, ponderosas are too in some places, but it depends on where you are.
And then you start to wonder, like, oh, is this them trying to purge something? Like, are they producing more because they're purging something? Or if I pull, are they just going to create more to, you know, they trying to flush something from their system?
I guess sometimes when people teach ethical wildcrafting, they say don't take the pitch straight off the tree.
Right.
At least if it's covering up a wound.
For sure.
Try to pick it off a branch that fell or like the ground or somewhere it's not covering
or
up
sometimes
anything.
when it is free flowing, it's like looks like a testicle of pitch, where you can see that it's like about to break off, or because I'm super careful of about where to collect that, because it's Band-Aid first, or there's certain times when it's really runny, if you can just like set a jar near it, but being really mindful of what's that pitch's purpose for that tree. And like I said, just watching it over the years in specific stands, when the population is not doing well, but the pitch is plentiful, you have to wonder, like, is it flushing something? Is it trying to, like, push it through?
You like wonder, is someone studying this? Maybe not. I don't know. Like, what's going on in that interface?
Yeah. And then to not have an answer to that question, I'm like, okay, but if that's a situation, I'm just gonna leave that be.
So y'all didn't test like needles or bark per se, although the bark has some sap in it, so that's kind of a crossover, but it's like, I guess so can the needles in some ways, but you mainly focused on the pitch.
Mostly because that was traditional usage. I mean, the bark also has use and the needles have use, but the bulk of what we were finding for traditional use was the pitch. And it's like the research is done over the course of 2 quarters, which you think is all the time in the world. And then when you're actually doing it, you're like, we couldn't add another facet to this research if we wanted to. Because it's just, like, I'm not a very exact person. I'm not a very hyper methodical person, which is probably why I'm not a researcher. But that became like the really challenging part.
Because you're like, we could get sap from different populations in different places, different times of the year, different qualities of sap.
Yes, like the amount of research that could come from this specifically is like next level.
Yeah, like a lot of scientific research just needs lots of repetition there's going to be different results, that vary, and then the collection of that is what gives you more quality understanding of what's really happening, at least from this storyline, this version of what it could look like to look at truth or look at, because you don't necessarily have to do this to know, because obviously people knew for a long time. But it's the funding and the impetus science is driven by capitalism and people's interest in making money off of things that are found. So that doesn't. I'm often saying on the podcast that it's not an unbiased field in the sense of the pure fact that money influences what gets researched and what doesn't. Right.
Simply. And the last thing we want is for Big Pharma to be out there mindlessly collecting pitch. It's like the best case scenario would be that the research is replicated and people see the validity of it because they validate science more than indigenous or anecdotal evidence. But the best case scenario would be that it's validated and then people start collecting their own in mindful ways and minding the populations that they're interacting with. That's the best case scenario.
Yeah, that there's an intentionality and skill behind how it's being gathered sustainably. I guess the catchword now is regeneratively. I don't know, people are not saying sustainable anymore as much as they're saying regenerative. I don't really know. It's a whole different...
But it's like if people valued the outcome of the pitch, they would value the tree.
You hope so.
You hope so. That's what would become of it.
So what did you find?
So research is really complicated in all of its many outcomes. So we were testing 2 outcomes. We were testing TNF alpha, which is tumor necrosis factor, and that's an inflammatory marker that really, that's kind of the guy that calls out and it's like, we got a problem here, everybody. We need more white blood cells now. Everybody on the scene, stat. And then we also wanted to test nitric oxide, which is kind of one of the things that helps modulate the process. Yeah, and then the other thing that we wanted to measure was its effect on nitric oxide production, which is responsible for like vasodilation. So like in the example again, where if you had like cut yourself really bad, you'd have your TNF alpha in there and being like, yo guys, we need some cleanup. We need somebody to come in here and carry out pathogens and cause some inflammation so we can constrict blood flow. And then you'd want nitric oxide so that you could have blood flow picked up and
moved.
Yeah.
Vasodilation's so like the circulation.
Right. Movement. Bringing in fresh, clean blood, clearing out all the detritus of your, finger cutting or whatever.
So certain plants encourage that process of the moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so our nitric oxide assay, something messed up and we got no results from that. But we did see a reduction in TNF alpha, which was really cool. My personal favorite part of the whole research, because it's like I want to see what our conclusion really, it's like our conclusion was kind of like, seemed rather inconclusive. Our research assistant, Tracy Pantuso, she was pretty excited about it. And I was like, I don't really...
Inconclusive is not what you want.
It felt inconclusive. So it's like, we had a reduction in TNF alpha. I'm trying to find, I thought I had like an exact number. It showed a statistically significant reduction of TNF alpha. So that's what we walked away with, was that it was statistically significant in reducing this like one marker of inflammation.
Is this published in a journal somewhere?
No, so me and my lab mates are actually talking about coming together. It was funny, right when you even asked about this, we had already started talking about coming together and writing the paper, because the degree ends with you presenting this at the research, I forget, they have a name for it.
Seminar type thing.
Yeah, it's like a research presentation that happens every year at the end of the year. And everybody who does research at Bastyr comes together and presents at the same time. And there's some cool presentations there. But anyway, so we're talking about sitting down and writing this and turning it into a paper.
Because maybe that could plant the seed for someone else to try it a little different, or try repeating it and see. Because
we had a few issues with our nitric oxide end of the experiment. We had it's called an ELISA assay, and we had done it twice, and both times they failed. So we're not sure if it was the media. We like regrew our cell lines a couple times, and that's like a whole process. You gotta show up and feed these cell lines over and over again, and like cut the populations in half so you're encouraging production. And that was like a whole 4-week process before we could even begin the research. So it was kind of like our time crunch really limited us being able to redo that part of the research, because that to me is also the more interesting aspect. Like, we already know that it has an impact on inflammation, but really understanding like that modulation aspect to me is really interesting. Like, to see that you can lower the TNF production, really lower that more aggressive side of wound healing. But if we could have seen like what the nitric oxide would actually do in terms of vasodilation, in terms of like having different messaging to inflammatory cells, that to me I think is really interesting. Okay, so let's see. Let me get my head around. So the real results, the real findings, why the research was cool. So we agitated all the cells. We had an experiment that was treated with no Ponderosa Pine. Then we had the 30% unfiltered, 30% filtered, and the 90%. ethanol extract of the Ponderosa Pine, and the 90% ethanol extract was the one that showed actual reduction in the inflammatory markers.
Cool. But the rest were inconclusive for the most part.
The rest didn't really, like, even the 30%. The 30% powdered had slightly more of a reduction in inflammatory markers, but for the most part, they were really right there with the ones that weren't treated at all with the control. And the 90% Ponderosa Pine pitch actually showed a reduction.
This is 90%. You're talking about alcohol that you used? Okay.
Yeah.
Right, alcohol is really good for extracting resins.
Right.
Or, soluble with resins.
Yeah, so the 30% alcohol extraction is almost closer to a control than not.
Well, what about, like, the fact that traditional use wouldn't have included alcohol? Like, how do you think about what people would have traditionally done when you can't extract like that?
I think that it probably would have just been eaten, and there's no better extractor than, like, your digestive system. So if you were using, and a lot of it would have been topical use. So, like,
animal fats.
Yeah, rendered into animal fats and bear grease and, whatever fat was available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, like, pretty much what would have been available. And that's a really great way to get the resins into the thing, too. Yeah.
So it could have been more needles and bark for teas and water extract, and then animal fats for topical use and resin extract.
You think internally just eating it would have the same effect as this 90% extract? Or
no, it's like, the more I think about it too, it's like there's so many compounds in the fresh pitch. Like when you extract pitch in the alcohol, you know how you always get that bottom layer that's just like insoluble in the alcohol. So you'd probably just digest a bunch out, really.
Mm-hmm.
You'd probably get some benefit, but yeah, it probably would need to be external use in fats. And then, of course, your tooth, the tooth method would still work.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting how medicine can evolve as our technology evolves and as we have new ways of exploring what is possible with plants,
Right.
Yeah.
Like Schizandra and milk thistle come to mind. Like now we tincture those things, but traditionally, like at super high percentages, but we never would have done that before. I think about that a lot, like with milk thistle tincture. Like what's the thought process behind how or why this actually works? But that's a whole other
thing.
But yeah, I just wanted to, because I was thinking about the results of the experiment, and I'm like, oh, yeah, it really makes a difference when you look at the range of the treatments we put on the cells.
If somebody threw you some money to do more research, would you get in the lab and do it?
I would be the harvester.
You're like, I'll bring you the pitch.
I'll do all the, I would do all the research on the botanical backside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's not true. If somebody was like, hey, Jackie, we're going to do another round.
Like, all right.
I would be like, okay, cool, let's do it.
Yeah.
Especially to not be at the end of, the other part of this is earning a bachelor's from Bastyr is a really intense and arduous process. And so it's like you have this going on amongst all your other classes. Yeah. It'd be really nice to have the spaciousness just to
do this
devote to just this.
Yeah.
But
well, that's super fascinating. Like, to bring it back into the realm of people who will probably never find themselves dabbling in this. So what would you suggest, I guess, the kind of relationship someone should have or could have with Ponderosa? I mean, we've basically spoken to that to a degree in this, like what could we offer people listening as like a reason to value this tree in their lives, like.
Man, I mean, I could think of a lot of things to say. It's like
it just smells plain nice too.
Right.
Like if I could be burning some on this wood stove right now while we did this interview, there's
like,
sagebrush and creosote bush on, which have their own essential oils and volatile oil things going on. But
like,
you know.
Colorado summers, thinking of Colorado in July at a certain elevation, it's like that smell. You know, it has a lot of vanillin in it. And so it just smells. It's like, go up to the bark and just crunch some bark up with your fingers, and it just is the most comforting smell. But, you know, I think my love of Ponderosa really began with it as somebody in my landscape. You know, I just think they're really magnificent, beautiful, stately. They have such magnetic personalities, or tree-analities. I don't know what the right word would be. But I think just spending time with it in any capacity, and like, you know, next time you find yourself with a upper respiratory gunk, make yourself some tea with Ponderosa pine needles and like explore what that feeling is. Because something...
Like a chest rub with oil too.
Yeah. Because something cool that I think... here's a nerdy bit that I think is helpful for people. Any plant with essential oils is always going to work on your kidneys and your lungs and your skin, because those are the 3 easiest ways for volatile oils to escape your body. And they're volatile. They always want to be volatilizing. So, you know, like making tea with the needles, it's going to work because as you digest it, those volatile oils are going to come out through your lungs and express antimicrobial activity in your lungs, you know, like in the tissue. But I don't know, man, it's just an awesome tree. I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't want to go explore. Or the next time you have a toothache, put some pitch, a little bit of pitch in your mouth and work it to a little gummy spot.
How do you get it out when it's time to move it on? You swallow it?
Yeah,
it's fine to swallow.
Yeah, you just fidget with it for 2 days until it comes out.
Brush it.
Yeah, it's pretty...
I like to chew on pitch sometimes, but then I'm like, no, it's kind of stuck here and here. And yeah. Like, it tastes really interesting, and then I'm like, I always wonder, like, what now?
I always think those people are way cooler than me, because I do not care to chew on it, like chewing gum. Like, you know, there's those people who are like, oh, a little bit of nature, it's chewing gum. And I'm like...
You're like, and then you're like, nah.
I'm like, man, if you had a mouth full of toothaches, then I could see it, you know? But, like, just straight chewing it, I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy.
You could tincture the pitch, too, and put it in, like, a sore throat formula, probably. Huh?
Oh, yeah. And you want to tincture it at, like, 90%.
As strong as possible.
Yeah.
I was like, what would be a really great bioregional formula here, or Ponderosa grows in this region, that would be good for, say, something like lungs or sore throat? I guess Ceanothus probably be maybe a good one, maybe for the sore throat.
Maybe, I mean, in terms of kind of clearing out your lymphatic system of live and or particle bits. But for sore throat, you said?
Or I guess a lung formula versus a sore throat formula would be slightly different. But
yeah, I mean, you could do lung formula with like some usnea. I mean, an usnea is one of those things that's better with a dual extract because it has water soluble and alcohol soluble components. But, you know, there's always synergizing in formulas too, you know, so you could do a double extracted usnea and bump it to the highest that you could and do like, you know, usnea, Ponderosa Pine, Osha, depending on where you fall in that spectrum of usage. Grindelia.
A substitute for Osha.
Like small bits of lomatium, depending on how deep in the lungs it is. And then using some sort of synergizer in there to kind of keep all your constituents together. So like the Araliaceae is very well known for being synergizers, but some folks, like Dr. John Bastyr, who the school was founded by, or one of the people he's founded by, loved like 5% of glycerin in all formulas to help synergize your highly ethanolic tinctures with some that are a little bit more on the water level. Monarda would be great for both lung or sore throat. Man, that's an antibacterial boo right there.
I would love to be chewing on some Monarda leaves right now.
Yeah.
Bee balm, for people who don't know what that is. That's one name, bee balm.
Right. Horse mint is how I first learned it. And someone was like, oh, here's bee balm. I'm like, oh my gosh, it looks just like Horse mint, because it is, right. Okay, got it. But yeah, that's where I'd go for lungs.
Cool. You make a lot of like different aromatic medicines too. Like, do you use Ponderosa pitch in any of them?
I love aromatic medicines.
Like, I've seen your stuff at the store. It's like you got like juniper body oil or something, I think, and then I don't know what else.
Like my most recent obsession is subalpine fir, because up on the mesa. I mean, I've never lived anywhere where there's so much of it. I'm just all about, like, when you had mentioned Lisa Ganora talking about the way plant constituents literally impact our DNA and the way we function. I went to a really good talk where Guido Masse was talking about just sometimes even just the smallest amount of an introduction of plant into your life can awaken a part of your DNA. And that's really, like, aromatic tree medicine right now is kind of, like, really making my heart happy. So I've really been enjoying a lot of that.
It feels really grounding for me to smell. I like cottonwood resin too for that, but like conifers and cottonwood scents just do something, you know, like it's hard to describe it with words, but it's like there's some kind of, it feels like ancient, and like you can kind of drift away for a moment beyond the immediate drama of the moment of what it means to be human or something. It's like I don't know. And I mean, the conifers have been around a long time. It's the older tree than the flowering trees, you know.
Right.
Older group of trees, the cone bearing, and as humans we've coexisted with them for a long time, as long as it means to be human. So of course we would respond somehow, you know. There's
something about them that just,
we burn their wood too. Shelters out of.
They do so many things for us. It's like, what is that? The Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like they're there to provide shelter. The inner bark is like food for so many peoples, and then to take it to the next level in medicine, and then we can carve it and adorn ourselves and find meaning, you know, in these trees. And for me, a lot of times too, like, plants are the bridge to the ancestral connection that I don't have, you know, like assimilation does a hell of a number on people. So it's like a lot of my connections to my Finnish heritage or my Irish heritage really aren't there because of assimilation, but it's like, man, trees and plant medicine can bring it back so fast. You know, like birch tincture is like, that's it's like it just brings back memories of things I don't myself know.
You can't even like recite the facts, but you feel it somehow.
You're like, there's facts in there somewhere that I don't care about at all, because I just feel so connected and whole there.
Yeah, we got really geeky in this conversation and then talked about some like social justice stuff and these other realms, but the thing that you're most passionate about in your main work, I mean, I just went to your class the other day at the apothecary here in town that was like about Imbolc and Bridget and like the ceremonial time and this part of the wheel and the linear, circular, spiralic wheel of the stories of this moment in time, you know, and that could be like a whole other podcast sometime. It's like some storytelling, you know, I mean, blending the science and the storytelling is I think it would be really cool. So when's your herb schools? When are you starting your herb school?
It starts tomorrow.
I'm like, this area needs that. I know Lisa's not officially doing that here, but I'm like, I think you could do that with the combination of things.
We've talked about, like, how do we have a skills school, or not using the word school, but like skills facilitation or something, I don't know. But I'm really a both and person. It's like my love of herbalism started, but it was like with some storytelling roots, you know, like my first 8 years of my life I was raised Catholic, probably maybe more like 10. So there's like that, but I'm a both and person. I'm really like, I think being raised that way, because Catholics, I don't know if I should even say this, Catholics are actually just pagans. So just, like growing up Catholic and then like starting to find my own way, and I was like, oh, this Catholics are doing this, they just don't know it. But yeah, I'm just a both and person. I love storytelling and mythology, and the oral tradition does, it's so much more than just stories, like they're guideposts. Mm-hmm. And then I'm nerdy as all get out and really get down on some sciencey, geeky shit too.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's the best place for people to find you online if they want to ask you questions or see classes you might be offering or your research published at some point? I guess that's to be continued. To be continued,
yeah.
But you have some other stuff you've done work around folklore, like you didn't even mention at all in this, but you've got a lot of that kind of stuff. Like where, by the time this comes out, potentially could people find access more to your work and what you're doing? So
the best place would probably be my Insta account. Okay. It's at Jacquie of the Hill, JACQUIE of the Hill. But you know, there's some forthwith coming resources, I hope. I'm also part of a puppet group called Singing Bone Medicine Show, and that's really one of the places where I get to breathe a lot of life into my love of storytelling and mythic. And you gotta be regional to Western Colorado to see those shows usually, huh? Yeah, hopefully there'll be some radio recordings coming soon and some song circle recordings coming soon, and yeah, that's a real passion project right there. But yeah, so both of those two places you can see me goofing around, farting around. Cool. Do you sell your medicines online? That's like one of the projects that I'm hoping to like really get dialed in. And cool. I suppose that would probably be through my Instagram page that people could hear about that. Okay. What medium you'll be selling them through online at some point? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Well, any last words before we... Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the whole... I'm so bad about, like, self-promotion, but you're really helping me, like, step out of it a little bit. And I appreciate the platform to talk about something that is not my normal sphere that I inhabit, which is in vitro research. But it's fun to visit and fun to talk about, so...
To the desert, dust in the wind, me on the earth, rocks in my hand, sun in the east, shadows in the west, hear the sound of slithering in the sand, red rocks rise and red rocks stand, winding through these desert lands, red rocks rise and red rocks stand, winding through these desert.
Hey y'all, Kelly here. Thanks for listening to this conversation with Jacquie Hill. The music for this episode is by Mama Lingua, a local Paonia, Colorado band, and hope you really enjoyed this conversation. You can find links to the things we talked about in the show notes of this episode, and links for further research, ways to support the podcast, groundshots.substack.com, or Venmo or PayPal, both linked in the show notes. Purchase regionally adapted landrace and heirloom seeds from Vibrant Earth Seeds, vibrantearthseeds.com, and use the discount code GroundShots10 when you check out to get 10% off, and also it helps support the podcast to do so. These are friends of mine who run a seed company in Southwest Colorado. Would love to support them and would love to also get support for the podcast by you getting seeds for your garden next season. GroundShots10 at checkout as your discount code. I'll have a link in the show notes for you. Leave us a review on iTunes. I would love to read them. The next episode should be coming live super quickly after this one. So thanks for listening. Really appreciate your attention and tuning into the podcast.